Let's go ahead now and build patch cables. Now, usually you would use patch cables that you purchase. It's a lot easier and they're relatively cheap. We use these patch cables to connect computers to RJ45 jacks and also to connect switches to patch panels. And there's varying other uses as well, but those are the main ones. Usually you'd buy these and they're known as straight through patch cables because they're wired the same way on both ends with the 568B standard. However, you might be called upon to create a patch cable. Let's say you need to do a custom connection, or let's say you just didn't have any of these patch cables available. Well, if so, then you'd need all this stuff here. You'd need cable, and I've already cut a 6-foot length to make a patch cable. Good cutter and wire stripper, just like with the last sub-lesson with the patch panel and RJ45 jack connections. Then you would need RJ45 plugs, which go on the end, on each end of the cable, which we will strip and open up the wires the same way we did in the last sub-lesson. And then you would need a crimper to crimp the RJ45 plugs onto the cable. Finally, a tester to test your cable and make sure all the wires are correct. So we're going to use all this stuff and we'll start it now. So first step, we already cut a length of cable and we're going to do the same thing that we did in the last sub-lesson. We're going to take off some of the PVC jacket. Don't want to cut in too far because we don't want to cut into the wires. And expose our 8 wires. And we're going to set these up in the 568B order, which is white, orange, orange, white, green, blue, white, blue, green, and white, brown, brown. And you want to try to put them in order and then straighten them out as much as possible by bending them until we have them all in order and somewhat flat. Okay, and at this point, I've adjusted these so they're in order for 568B, and you really got to work them and do them one at a time and keep bending and straightening. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut them and cut them flat so that there's an edge about here. And you want to have about maybe 1/4 inch of exposed wires outside the PVC jacket. And you want to cut them straight. And then immediately after, we're going to put the RJ45 plug on there and crimp it on. It's all kind of done in one step. So we'll take a cutter, place these in like so. Make sure they're right. White, orange, orange, white, green, blue, white, blue, green, white, brown, brown. Hold on tight and make the cut. Then we take our plug and we put it on, and we want the tab to be facing down. Stick those wires in. And once we get them all the way in and we want them to be flush over here, then we can crimp it by sticking the RJ45 plug into the crimper and tightening. And you don't need too much pressure, just until the crimper stops clicking, or at least finishes moving. And make sure it's secure. Then we'll do the same thing on the other end. And like I say, about 1/4 inch, maybe a little more, close between 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch. We cut this off. You don't want to do too much because you don't want too much exposed wires. You want to have the twists on the cable length go as close to the plug as possible. But you don't want to do it too short because you want to get those wires all the way to the edge of the plug. So we'll cut this guy. Hold on very carefully. A little shorter. Make sure you got a nice flat cut. Hold on to it. Put the plug on. And you want to try to get that plastic jacket underneath the tooth that's here. You want to get it inside there so when we crimp it, it crimps onto the plastic jacket, that blue jacket, and not the wires themselves. Stick it in, crimp it, and it looks good. And so this was a quick build. This particular cable is a little tough because it has that plastic separator in it. And that could be a little difficult to work with. So if you get cable and you need to make patch cables, you might want to get one without the plastic separator if possible. But it works. You can fit it in there. And as you can see here, we have the white-orange on the left of each cable. So each connection is wired to 568B. And we're going to test that right now by using our patch tester. Plug each end in. And we test this just by pressing the test button. Press test, and you can see the lights go on for pin 1, pin 2, pin 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it's all good. So for a straight through cable, for your standard patch cable, that's what you want. And so this tests good. And boom, we've got a Cat 6 patch cable. Place this to the side. Now you may also be called upon to create a crossover cable. And a crossover cable uses 568B on one end and the older 568A on the other end. And here we have an example of that. And quite often I use orange cables to show crossover cables. And you can see on this connector, the leftmost pins are orange. That's 568B. And on this connector, the leftmost pins are green. That's 568A. So we could use a cable like this to connect two computers directly together, or two other like devices directly together, like two routers or two switches. Although nowadays that's not usually necessary because you have auto negotiation of the ports and they can tell what type of cable you have connected. But you can also test these guys. We could place these plugs in here. And basically what a crossover cable is a cable that crosses the orange and green pairs. So if we press the button, we get 1 goes to 3. White-orange is the first pin in 568B, but it's the third pin in 568A. 2 crosses to 6. That's the orange pin. And vice versa. 3 crosses to 1. That's the white-green, because it's the third pin in 568B. It's the first pin in 568A. 4 goes to 4. 5 goes to 5, so blue is normal. 6 goes to 2. And that is your green pin. And 7 and 8 are normal. Those are the brown. So that's how we can tell if this crossover cable is wired properly. And so this one was a molded one. It's orange. And I also have my own that I created. I usually keep 1 or 2 with me in my kit just in case I need to connect something. This one I actually built. And it tests fine. So a little bit of testing with straight through cables, which connect unlike devices like a computer to a switch, and crossover cables that test like devices like a computer to another computer or a switch to a switch. And so I do have another crimper here, and it's just the same thing. Whatever works, whatever crimps the plugs on good for you is what you need. And a lot of these crimpers come with the RJ45 connector as well as the RJ11. So if you're doing any telco work. And that cutter. You know, a good cutter on the crimper is really necessary. You could use something like this, but you might not get a really straight cut. And so this works very well. And there we have it. Our patch cable is done. We've got a Cat 6 6-foot straight through cable, unshielded twisted pair. And so, you know, you can build these pretty quick. In real time, I could make one of these in under The fastest I ever did is maybe 2 minutes. But again, it's easier to just use the ones that you purchase. For example, these molded cables here, which are machined and will most likely last longer. But if you ever have a problem or you suspect a problem with a patch cable, use one of these RJ45 patch testers and make sure that all the wires go across for a straight through cable. Great tool to have. So that's it. Tools you need. You need your cable. Got to have that cable. I'm using Cat 6. You need your crimpers. Always want to have your cutter and your wire stripper available. And RJ45 plugs. This is got a 100 pack here. These are for Cat 6 as well. And remember that everything has to comply along the chain. If any link along the chain is less than Cat 6, then the whole chain gets reduced to that lesser amount. So the plugs have to be good, the cable has to be good, the patch panel, the RJ45 jack, all of it. And another great tool to use, we have the loopback tester, which you can use to test network cards and also switches. Really good for switches. If you want to plug these into, say, an RJ45 jack, it'll help you to test the switch, whether the port is good or not. There's actually a couple uses for this, and I talk about these more in my books, but great tool to have, RJ45 loopback tester. It's got the female and the male ends, so you can do a lot of different testing with that, but generally used to check switches and switch ports. So there you have it, patch cables, and that pretty much sums it up. That's the end of this sub lesson.